feel free to grab some water, some coffee while I'm introducing the panel. Okay. It's better pointing that way, right? It's fine, yeah. Andy is gonna introduce you. Okay, let me start, and while I'm just doing the introductions, you feel free. So welcome again, everyone, to the Pulitzer Center Annual Conference, Interconnected Reporting the Climate Crisis. We are very honored to have you all here in Washington, D.C. with us, and also we welcome those who are watching us online. My name is Gustavo Faleiros. I'm the editor of the Pulitzer Center Rainforest Investigations Network. Interconnected Reporting the Climate Crisis is the Pulitzer Center's 6th annual conference, focused this year on the very urgent crisis facing our planet's coastlines, rainforests, oceans, and the impact on people and communities who inhabit these environments. As we heard in the previous panel, this urgent situation requires journalists to collaborate. Global issues such as climate change can only be covered with global, regional, and local collaboration. That's why this panel, Collaborating Against Climate Change, is about stories, investigations, and projects done in collaboration. And to moderate this panel, no one is better than Andy Lehren, the senior editor of NBC News investigative team. I want to tell a little bit about Andy's experience, if you allow me, Andy, because he has a long experience on collaboration. Andy has reported on pandemic and economic relief efforts, and most recently a lot of reporting on rainforests in collaboration with some of the fellows of the Rainforest Investigations Network. Andy is a 2 times fellow of the Rainforest Investigations Network. But prior to that, he's participated in many of the collaborative efforts, investigative efforts that we know, like such as FinCEN files, the China files. And before joining NBC, Andy also was working for 13 years at the New York Times, and he was one of the key figures at the WikiLeaks papers, or the trove of diplomatic cables, the Afghan and Iraq war logs. So his work is really outstanding. And just to let you know, some of these stories were compiled on the best-selling book, Open Secrets. So Andy, I will invite you to introduce our guests. I'm just going to remember everyone to keep using the hashtag #Interconnected2022 to join the conversation with others in the conference and those who are watching online. And as always, keeping the mask to protect your fellows in this room. Yeah, so Andy, welcome.
Thank you, Gustavo. So the classic image so many have of journalists is the lone wolf, the single reporter in dogged pursuit of the big story. The reality today is that the big story is often covered in collaborations and cross-border collaborations. Reporters in newsrooms around the world sharing documents, data, interviews, often on encrypted platforms, probing important subjects in new ways. I'm Andy Lehren. I've been working on collaborations for more than a decade at the New York Times and now at NBC News, and we're proudly part of the Pulitzer Center's Rainforest Investigative Network. I get asked a lot about collaborations. Here's what a collaboration is not. It is not one journalist working just as a fixer for another news organization. It is not just an agreement to publish related stories at different news outlets. It's much more. What Marina Walker here at the Pulitzer Center calls radical sharing. Sharp, talented reporters getting together to probe a line of inquiry, sharing ideas, skills, talents, time to make a good line of reporting better, where 1 + 1 does not equal 2, but 1 + 1 = 3. The Pulitzer Center fosters collaborations among journalists, and what better way to explore what collaborations are all about but this amazing panel we have today. Here to talk about collaborations is this incredible panel to talk about their experiences, the lessons they have learned, and advice that they have on how to make a good collaboration better. With us are Francesc, Badia, Dalmases. He's a Mexican journalist and political analyst based in Barcelona and Bogota. He is the founder and director of Democracia Abierta, a global platform for Latin American voices, and he's a regular contributor to El País, The Guardian, and other publications. And he won the Gabo Prize for his work on the Amazon. Karol Ilagan reports for and manages the editorial desk at the Philippine Center for Investigative Journalism, a Manila-based investigative nonprofit. She also teaches investigative reporting and data journalism at Manila universities. And we also have Kharishar Kahfi, who you may know him as Kuka. He's a journalist at the Jakarta Post, the leading English media company in Indonesia. He reported mostly on science and environmental issues in Indonesia before becoming one of the Post's deputy editors. He's now a graduate student studying science journalism at New York University. And Kuka, we will start with you. If you want to come up here, feel free.
Yeah, my cheat sheets and glass of water. I'm so nervous right now. Oh, so yeah, good morning, everyone, and also good afternoon or evening for those of you who are watching from far away. Yeah, we are all journalists, and journalists like anecdotes, right? And seeing something like that to open their stories. So let me start with one. So it was 2019 when it was my, I think it's my second year of reporting on environmental issues in Indonesia. And I was at the Indonesian Environmental and Forestry Ministry. I was talking with other journalists from Indonesian outlets. And then I remember that one senior journalist, if we can call her a senior journalist, from Kompas, her name is Brigita Isworo. She said that it is time for media to collaborate. It is time for journalists to collaborate rather than compete against each other so we can discover more stories, deeper stories, and also amplify our stories to make the impact that we wanted. So that specific quote still circling in my head until 1.5 years later. That brings me to this collaboration project, which under Climate Tracker and also supported by Pulitzer Center. So hi, I'm Kharishar Kahfi, or Kuka. Well, Kuka is easier to pronounce, so just call me Kuka. As Andy said, I'm a journalist at Jakarta Post. I'm also a grad student at NYU, New York University, and also work briefly at Climate Tracker. So here's the collaboration that I did under Climate Tracker and also supported by Pulitzer Center. So as you know, Southeast Asia is one of the hotspots for tropical rainforest and also, unfortunately, the deforestation. So illegal logging and also land opening for plantations, big and small, has been so rampant in the region. And also development, as you know, most countries in the Southeast Asia is still doing lots of development. But there is some good news that there are initiatives in the region to protect or even restore the degraded forests. And some of these initiatives are led by people who live in and around the forests. So me and my colleagues in Climate Tracker saw this as a perfect opportunity to spread the good news, well, good news, as Mas Wahyu said earlier, and to inspire other people to a certain level that there are still hopes for these rainforests. So we are focused on 4 countries, Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, and Philippines. So because those are the countries with these initiatives and also with great potential for rainforests. So I've been mentioning Climate Tracker a lot, I guess, in the past 2 minutes. So what is Climate Tracker actually? So Climate Tracker is an international nonprofit organization focusing on climate journalists. So we want to support them to tell better and more climate stories and environmental stories because we know maybe environmental issues is not really an important one, especially in lots of newsrooms in Southeast Asia, I guess. So we want to help these journalists to tell more climate and environmental stories. One of our biggest programs is sending journalists to COP, to the United Nations Climate Conference, but since we cannot travel much during the pandemic, we also help these journalists through some fellowships and programs for them to tell stories from their home country. I worked there briefly for around a year, I guess, from 2020 to 2021 before I moved to New York, in which I met lots of great journalists, especially in Southeast Asia, including the ones I collaborated with. Nope, the slide is not changing. Come on. Okay, so here are the collaborators that I work with. There's me on the left-hand side. We selected these journalists through a selection process, and also we discuss a lot about what issue we should talk about in our collaboration project. So there's Mai from Vietnam. She was one of my colleagues at Climate Tracker. She's currently studying at Harvard. She is an amazing journalist. I read her stories and really mesmerized by them. And there's also Siti, a wonderful journalist from Indonesia. She lives in Pekalongan, and it's in Central Java, one of the provinces in Indonesia. She focuses on environmental and gender issues. And also there's Gea Kabiko. She's also wonderful. A wonderful climate journal from Philippines. Maybe Karol can support me on that. And also there's Joe, from New Zealand, but he was based in Cambodia at the time of the project, and really amazing photographer and writer. So yeah, it's a quick project. It's a 3-month, no, come on, slides. Technology. Well, okay, so here's the general timeline of the program. It's a quick program, only 3 months. Well, I wish I have more time. Well, it's a luxury that most journalists don't have, right? So yeah, we did the whole project in just 3 months. But I like to focus on the workshop and training because most collaboration projects that I heard only focus on the reporting and writing, but in this project, we also give some workshops and training, like a capacity building, because we know that not every journalist in Southeast Asia have the same understanding on the forestry issues, on the climate issues. So, especially on the regional level, because some of these journalists are working on the local level. So we want to help them to connect the dots, from their local reporting, that there are, bigger issues out there. Yeah, and so the capacity building, the training, and the workshops, we're focused on 2 groups: the thematic workshop and the journalism training. For the thematic workshops, we share knowledge with our collaborators about the conditions of the tropical rainforest and the deforestations, and also some efforts to restore the degraded forests in Southeast Asia. We were helped by Professor Novea Sasaki from Thailand. He has done some research on the forest issues and also reforestation. I remember that after the session with him, he said that he really appreciated this collaboration because not only the journalists learn from him, but also he learned so much from the journalists. You know, because there are some gaps between scientists and journalists. So he said that he really appreciated that sessions. For the journalism training, we focus on some aspects like reporting on forests and also solutions journalism. I know that some journalists in the US might not agree on the approach, but we want to try this approach in this project. And also the safety, because going to the forest to report on from the deep of the forest, it's sometimes it's dangerous. Like what happened to our colleague Don Phillips recently. We were helped by Hans Nicholas Jong. He is a Mongabay journalist from Indonesia with so many experience in reporting on forests. And also a past fellow from Climate Tracker. And then we go on and report and write the stories and produce these many stories, around 8 stories, 1 stories that focus on the region, and also 7 stories focus on the countries. Oh wow, 5 minutes left, gosh. And also we, just like Ian Urbinas said yesterday, that we want to amplify these stories even after we're done with the reporting. So we produce a podcast with the journalists talking about the behind the scene. Also, I forgot to put in the slides that we held a webinar so we can connect with the audience and perhaps other scientists and also journalists about the work we did in these countries. So, technologies. Yeah, so some lessons that we learned from this project, from this collaboration is at least I finally realized that the collaboration desk connects the knowledge from these journalists from various countries in Southeast Asia. And also we now know there are sources that we can talk to that we haven't before. And also we can connect the dots that the work we did is actually part of the bigger thing happening out there in the region. And moreover, I hope it inspires people from different countries that there are solutions that work in one place that they might try in their own place. But also, well, I hope we have more time to focus not only on the thematic workshop, but also in other parts of the training, like more time to discuss on the issues, more time to reflect on our reporting. So perhaps measure the impact of our reportings. But yeah, again, that's one luxury journalists don't actually have. So perhaps I will reward it as a better planning and management on the whole project. And also the one major challenge that we face is the language barrier, because there are so many languages in Southeast Asia. We have Bahasa Indonesia, we have Tagalog from Philippines, and also Vietnamese. These languages often, kind of becomes a barrier for journalists to connect with each other, because not all journalists in Southeast Asia, especially the ones usually working on the local level, can communicate well in English. So yeah, this is one major issue that we still need to look for the solutions. Maybe we can make Bahasa Indonesia or Indonesian as the main language in Southeast Asia. I don't know if you all agree about that, but yeah, maybe that's one controversial idea. Because Indonesia has the largest population in Southeast Asia. Okay, so yeah, closing statement. So the one that I presented, that I just presented, is only one model of collaboration, of collaborative reporting in journalism, between journalists. It works so far at certain level, I might say. although there are still some issues that we still need to address, like I was picturing to publish all the stories made by these collaborators in every outlets that we work on. Like, I want to publish their stories in the Jakarta Post, but that might be hindered by the publishing rights or copyright, something like that. These are also the issues that come up when we had discussions about 2 days ago with the Rainforest Journalism Fund grantees, and also how to work better or more effectively on sharing resources, something like that. But at least, yeah, this is one small step in collaborative reporting. And I might say that collaboration is just like a romantic relationship. It's just like, you know, people with different egos, different mindsets and perspective. We need to find to compromise to go to shared goals or purposes. So, you know, journalists like to compete with each other. So the first step is to, you know, get rid of this ego and then go on our shared purpose of telling better stories to reach more audience and make a bigger impact. Yeah, just like romantic relationship, I guess. So, yeah, this is just one small step. I believe that you have more methods of collaborating, so we might, it's good for us to have more discussions about this, you know, to find a model that really works for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kuka. Karol is coming next, but I just want to say that when Francesc speaks, he'll be speaking in Spanish. If anyone needs, there are headsets back there for when Francesc speaks, but Karol will go next.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Karol Ilagan from the Philippines. I'll be sharing lessons from having the privilege of being able to work on collaborations with Andy, Marina, Gustavo, and the NBC News team through the Pulitzer Center Rainforest Investigations Network. And aside from that, we've also had the opportunity to work on periodic collaborations with the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists on offshore and finance investigations. And I'm also happy to share that in the last 2 years in Asia, we've been able to explore and also do our own collaborations. For example, PCIJ collaborating with Tempo in Indonesia, South China Morning Post, and the Korea Times, as well as in-country collaborations, actually. So, for example, working with newsrooms like ABS-CBN, GMA News, and Rappler in the Philippines. The journalism business is naturally competitive. Getting exclusives typically is what newsrooms dream of. But over the years, we've realized that it's actually more radical to tear these walls of competition and exclusivity and work together. In the context of reporting climate change, making a case for collaborations should be easy, if not imperative. Technology.
I think you have to point the remote to...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's me. Okay. This map from the Global Forest Watch showing tree cover loss, emerging hotspots, and places to watch show how few stories are more urgent and global than the destruction of the tropical rainforests. Alongside that fact is, where the destruction of forests happen, decline in democracy also persists. This map from Freedom House shows how across the globe, freedom has taken a backslide with more countries in the global south less free. The case for journalists in these countries has not gotten better either, as freedom of expression inherently is also under threat. On ground, that means being silenced, from libel threats to getting killed. As the climate crisis intensifies, the situation for frontline communities and defenders of the earth, as we know, is also getting worse. Global Witness in 2021 reported that on average, 4 defenders have been killed every week since the signing of the Paris Climate Agreement. And this figure is almost certainly an underestimate. The recorded attacks are linked to resource exploitation across logging, hydroelectric dams, and other infrastructure, mining, and large-scale agribusiness. And as we all know, the window to prevent global temperatures from rising is rapidly closing. Decisions made this year could determine whether the target would be met. Thank you. Perhaps no story is more international, intersectional, and interconnected than climate change. While journalists are continually under threat in many climate-vulnerable countries, collaborations has made it possible for us to report climate change because collaborations meant pooling resources and skills and managing exposure and risk. On a practical side of this all, how do we even begin? If there are no leaks, which as we've seen, have been crucial in some of the most powerful investigative collaborations we've seen in the past. I wish to offer 3 tips, which I've learned from all of my colleagues at the Rainforest Investigations Network. First is understanding the supply chain. We've been talking about this since yesterday, but I just wanted to highlight again that understanding how the trade of commodities is driving deforestation worldwide opens avenues for collaborations. So some key resources are export and import data. Manuela enumerated some good resources yesterday, such as Panjiva, Comtrade, Import Genius, and DataMine. Financial statements and corporate disclosures, and of course, talking to industry experts, civil society, and researchers. And as we know, some have also succeeded by following trucks, barges, and ships, or maybe even following airplanes. Some examples of these stories include Manuela finding out that cattle farms in Brazil leather from here go to automakers in the US. My colleagues at Tempo, Bagja Hidayat, and Dini Pramita were able to track that timber from Indonesia are exported to the US, China, Australia, and India. And as we've also shared yesterday, Palawan nickel goes to Tesla stores in the US and about 39 countries. I mentioned earlier financial statements and disclosures. I thought it's good to keep in mind that companies, especially those that are publicly owned, are subject to detailed disclosure laws about their financial condition, operating results, management compensation, and other areas of their business. So this is just an example of a financial statement where you can see where they have contracts with. So for example, customers with China and Japan, for instance. And then this document is a press release from Sumitomo, which basically kind of shows the supply chain that nickel is being used for batteries, which are then placed in Tesla cars. Another example of a company document, an annual report, actually, this is also from Sumitomo, again showing us the supply chain, giving us clues in the supply chain that from the nickel mine, where it goes, like which refinery plants, for instance, and then finally to the end customer. So of course, we don't just rely on these documents alone. Of course, verification is also needed. But in the course of this investigation, for instance, the Tesla one with NBC News, we found the financial disclosures very helpful. There are also other websites that have been very helpful. So for instance, there is Trace, which is an initiative that provides information on trade and financing of commodities driving deforestation worldwide. This is available online. While there might not be good information in your specific countries, it could be a good reference in looking at how they're tracking the supply chain map. Second tip is following the money. I guess just to put it in context, large and industry scale operations require big investments and loans. So we need to understand which companies will profit and stand to lose from these operations. So it would be good to look at banks, investors, and other institutions that help finance these companies. Also look at the role of offshore. It's also good to highlight ESG. I've come to learn of this term in the past few years. So the environmental, social, and governance criteria are a set of standards for a company's operations that socially conscious investors use to screen potential investments. So this is very important because the environment criteria must consider how a company performs as a steward of nature. So how are they exposed to deforestation risks? My colleagues at the RIN, Gloria Palhares and Maddie Nginga, published this story with the RIN wherein they found out that a century-old palm oil business in the DRC has exposed local population to tons of toxic waste. And the company had committed to respecting human rights in exchange for a massive cut in its multi-million-dollar debt to European development banks. And they also found out that the ownership of the company has been obscured by a network of offshore companies. On this slide, we're looking at data from Forests and Finance, which is another website where you can track funding or loans made by banks to companies that are that may have deforestation risks. So here I was surprised to find out that the letters are small, but there are Philippine banks that are actually providing loans to companies, palm oil companies that are outside of the Philippines, because the Philippines is not a major palm oil, it's not a big player in the palm oil industry. So you can also download the data in Excel sheets, so I thought that was very helpful. So for example, Philippine banks are giving loans and credit facilities to companies like Royal Golden Eagle and Wilmar. Okay. And here's another example from Sila Alessi of ICIJ, wherein they found out from leak records the role of offshore in forest destruction in Indonesia. And third, using the contracting lens. I think, again, to put it in context, governments enter into contracts with private entities or individuals for resource exploitation and land use conversion. So I think following the pipeline of the contracting process is important to establish the key actors in each stage of the contracting pipeline to understand the responsibilities as well as regulations. I'm reminded by the tip given by Manuela yesterday about how bureaucracy can be a reporter's best friend. Because typically for contracts like this, it runs years, decades even, for mining, for instance. So that means a lot of paper trail. So check for ownership, extent, and location of land concessions, and also monitor global commitments. Again, this is another story from our colleagues at the RIN, Gloria. An investigation by El País and Planeta Futuro finds evidence of illegal extraction of endangered tree species, precious minerals, and strategic metals headed for global markets. The investigation revealed that Chinese-owned companies use complaisance permits to log and export Aformosa, which international demand pushed to the extinction in other African countries and flags irregularities in the latest export quota. And finally, to close my session, I guess the fact that journalists working together on a cross-border story come from different races, languages, cultures, economic background, and newsrooms, small or big, nonprofit or commercial, makes collaborations by nature complex. So I think it's important to understand what each partner brings to the table, may it be local or topical know-how, data skills, digital prowess, access to international sources, or the reach and profile of their newsrooms. These are all valuable. So that means building trust, which is imperative if we are talking about the scale and importance of our investigation. But I know that building trust can be a little difficult if you are working with someone you just knew, because trust is considered as something that is built by working with a person for years. So I think this is where our professional integrity as well as our newsroom integrity comes in, which we must nurture. This also means respecting confidentiality and understanding the role of each partner in the editorial process. Andy and I, when we were working on the Tesla story last year, even though we are from different countries and different time zones, basically opposite, we were in almost all of the Zoom calls. And even during when we did the field work in Palawan, even though his team, Anna and Rich, are in New York, we were in touch before, during, and after the field work because they're very much aware of the security risks as well that our team in the Philippines are exposed to. So I really appreciated that. Thank you, Andy. As well, access to resources, training opportunities, and network of sources shape the collaboration. We don't just share information, but we also share skills and methods. Above all, I think it all boils down to taking care of each other. Observing this principle is crucial to make collaborations meaningful and essentially a successful public service. Thank you.
That? How is it? What? No, I don't know what's the presentation over here. There. This one. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I'll speak in Spanish because it's the second language of this country, and also for the sake of diversity and also for the sake of the work of the translators. So the first thing I do is agradecer al Pulitzer Center que me haya invitado a esta sesión y agradecer a todos ustedes de haber su asistencia. Yo les voy a contar dos historias de cómo colaboramos en democracia abierta y cómo montamos las historias. Voy a ir más a la cuestión concreta y menos a las cuestiones teóricas que son más complejas. La pregunta que queremos responder cuando nos acercamos a la crisis climática que estamos viviendo es cómo contarla de una manera que sea eficaz. ¿Qué quiere decir eficaz? No lo sabemos, pero una manera que funcione, una manera que llegue a las personas y que de alguna manera haga que la reflexión sobre la catástrofe que estamos viviendo sea a la vez profunda y a la vez envíe un mensaje de que positivo, ¿no? De que es posible, digamos, ir adelante, ¿no? Claro, antes de entrar en los ejemplos, quería también, ¿no?, referirme un momento a los dos colegas que están desaparecidos en el Amazonas y posiblemente no volverán a aparecer por los indicios que tenemos, y decir que nosotros que estamos ahí, venimos de ahí hace muy poco, pues ¿no? Nos sentimos como protagonistas de esta guerra, como decía Eliani, pero también estamos poniendo nuestro cuerpo delante de esta lucha y esto yo creo que es inevitable. Si no ponemos nuestro cuerpo delante de esta lucha no la vamos a ganar o no la vamos a parar. Y por lo tanto, pues efectivamente hay que controlar los riesgos, pero no hay que tener miedo, hay que avanzar, hay que trabajar y hay que ir allí sin miedo, porque las historias están allí y están esperando para que, ¿no?, para ser contadas y para que esto, digamos, vaya adelante. ¿Cómo hacemos para colaborar? Pues nosotros más que colaborar lo que hablamos de establecer alianzas, ¿no? Establecer, digamos, grupos de gente que trabaja conjuntamente con un objetivo, ¿no? Normalmente vamos, digamos, es el fotógrafo y el periodista, esto es, digamos, el equipo básico, pero esto va más allá. Esto ya no es el periodista que tiene un fotógrafo y el periodista dirige la investigación y el fotógrafo acompaña e ilustra, sino que ya es un trabajo conjunto entre el fotógrafo y digamos, el filmmaker y el propio periodista. La producción también es conjunta, ¿no? Y, de alguna manera, también otra cosa que es importante en la alianza es estar siempre de una manera simétrica, estar al 50%, no estar en una batalla de egos, de a ver quién va a firmar, quién no va a firmar. Esto, en realidad, es secundario. Entonces, las dos historias que les quería contar son ejemplos de colaboraciones que hemos hecho o de alianzas que hemos hecho ¿no?, recientemente. Una de ellas, ¿esto cómo va? ¿Así? No. ¿Otro más? Bueno, la primera historia que quiero contar es la de la paradoja verde, que ya hemos llamado. Es una historia sobre la extracción de madera de balsa en Ecuador y cómo esta extracción de esta madera va no solo la catástrofe que genera la sobreexplotación de la balsa en la selva ecuatoriana, sino también hacia dónde va, quiénes son los responsables, dónde no solo lo que sufren las poblaciones indígenas, sino quién está detrás de todo esto. Porque muchas veces cuando hacemos periodismo en la región nos fijamos en la catástrofe, nos fijamos en los que sufren en el territorio, en las consecuencias en el territorio. Pero es más difícil ver quiénes son los responsables que están detrás. Entonces, conectar los puntos, connecting the dots, es muy importante para que la historia agarre un vuelo y sea, digamos, más comprensiva y tenga mayor capacidad de impacto y digamos, de implicar a mayor público posible. Entonces, bueno, en este caso en principio queríamos contar una historia ¿no?, de cómo sale la extracción de la balsa y cómo llega a la fabricación de aspas de molinos de viento en Europa. Y en principio, pues bueno, ¿no?, lo primero que hicimos es identificar actores, ¿no? Primero con una cineasta que era digamos, la socia o la aliada de este proyecto, Cristina Juliana. Dijimos, bueno, vamos a ver qué actores necesitamos para contar esta historia. ¿Qué necesitábamos? Primero, ¿no?, contar la historia en Ecuador. En Ecuador habíamos estado en un proyecto previo con Pablo Alvarenga en uno de los capítulos de Rainforest Defenders y ya habíamos visto que la situación se estaba complicando mucho, porque ahí fuimos a reportear la llegada de una carretera a un lugar que se llama Pastaza, y esa llegada de la carretera auguraba todo tipo de catástrofes, porque cuando llegan las carreteras a la selva, lo que son como agujas que se meten dentro de la selva y extraen todo lo que pueden, o toda la sangre de la selva, y estos son y la carretera estaba en construcción, pero nosotros llegamos a la comunidad antes de que la carretera llegase. Entonces encontramos una comunidad protegida, una comunidad coherente que estaba trabajando en en barcos solares, en una alternativa, digamos, al combustible fósil, y que estaba en una dinámica muy positiva y muy creativa. Cuando volvimos a ese territorio, la catástrofe había llegado. Ya había llegado la carretera y había llegado, digamos, la extracción ¿no? de estos balseros de una manera industrial, de una manera agresiva, de una manera muy destructora de la comunidad y, digamos, fragmentando, haciendo sufrir, en fin, generando una catástrofe social y ambiental importante. Pero esta era una parte de la historia. Para entrar ahí necesitamos, como siempre, ¿no? Algún aliado, en este caso la autoridad indígena, que es la que, ¿no? habilita la entrada al territorio, y también la gente que tomase imágenes ahí. Pero luego necesitamos contar la historia en el otro lado, ¿no? Contar la historia de cómo salen los containers de Ecuador, cómo llegan a Europa, cómo van a la fábrica de aspas de los molinos, y cómo no solo eso, sino cómo estos molinos luego son instalados en parques eólicos en Europa, y cómo la instalación de estos parques afecta también a las comunidades que están, digamos, viviendo en territorios despoblados, en este caso en España, pues, ¿no? De repente les llegan estos monstruos de 100 metros de alto, y de alguna manera impactan también a su territorio. Y lo curioso es ver también que el discurso que tienen los indígenas del Amazonas es parecido al que tienen luego las poblaciones de los pueblos pequeños en España, que también sufren el otro lado de la agresión, ¿no? La agresión de la llegada sin escrúpulos y sin consultar y sin, digamos, tener esta sensibilidad de cuál será el impacto que va a tener esta historia. Entonces, bueno, en esta historia conseguimos conectar todos estos elementos a través de establecer alianzas. Necesitamos un experto un experto académico que contase cómo hay tecnología para sustituir la madera de balsa con otros materiales que no sean extractivos, ¿no? Que sean epoxis y que de alguna manera consigan que estas aspas ya no necesiten extraer la madera de balsa. También hablamos con un ingeniero de General Electric que había trabajado en aspas de molinos y que también conocía que las soluciones existen. Otra cosa es que se quieren aplicar o los costes que pueda tener esto. Conseguimos la historia se alargó mucho más. Claro, fuimos a la fábrica de aspas en Portugal también, tampoco nos querían dejar entrar. Todos estos elementos forman parte del reportaje, ¿no? de conseguir que la historia se conecte. Finalmente, una historia que tenía que durar 5 minutos, lo que pasó es que duró pues 20 minutos de documental y toda la historia. Lo que entonces quiero mostrarles es brevemente un vídeo de 1 minuto donde pueden ver ustedes cómo la historia en imágenes.
Siamus kakara pano hapmuka kasunga takmu nunca me chamo takmu eu ya me ana kuitinem tewarita.
Nosotros como Achuar no queremos a las personas que vienen a aprovechar a nuestras comunidades.
No vendería esto por 4 duros a unas empresas.
Y al final están destrozando pues, el territorio, ¿no?
Nosotros no queremos vender la balsa.
Hubo impacto social.
Fue destrucción completa.
Bueno, esta es la primera historia que quería contarles. Es un una pequeña muestra del documental que está disponible en El País y también en nuestra página en Open Democracy, Democracia Abierta. La segunda historia, muy brevemente, que quería contar es la historia de un proyecto que se llama Rainforest Defenders, donde estamos en la segunda temporada. Es una historia muy interesante de colaboración porque nace también de una visión conjunta de varias personas que se dan cuenta, o nos damos cuenta, que para explicar el impacto del cambio climático y de la crisis que está viviendo el Amazonas no es suficiente hacerlo individualmente, hay que hacerlo colectivamente. De ahí que lo que hicimos es aliarnos con una asociación que hay en Brasil, la primera fase, que se llama Engajamundo, que ellos trabajan con pobladores de la selva, pero que son, digamos, activistas ambientales. Y ahí identificamos 5 historias o 5 personajes y fuimos con Pablo Alvarenga a vivir con ellos y de ahí sacar estas historias que son historias personales, historias de cómo los individuos, como la lucha personal, esto que decía antes, de cómo poner el cuerpo delante de la lucha es lo que hace que sea eficaz, ¿no? Que haya una comunicación y que haya, digamos, una fuerza. Haciendo historias personales, haciendo que la gente, o estos jóvenes, cuenten sus historias y cómo ellos ven su día a día, esto genera, digamos, una empatía y una identificación en el lector y el espectador, y esto hace que el problema o la cuestión urgente y el dramatismo que puede tener para las comunidades que están sobre el terreno se vea reflejado en la historia. Son historias multimedia, historias que llevan fotografía, vídeo y texto, y de alguna manera también la idea es esta, ¿no? Es ilustrar cómo es la gente la que está delante de esto. La selva no es un lugar despoblado, la selva no se defiende sola. La selva es un sistema integrado donde los que habitan mantienen la selva en pie. Los que están allá no son solo gente que está allí como otros, sino que ellos son los que mantienen el ecosistema en funcionamiento. Y si desaparecen ellos, desaparece también la selva. Y viendo cómo las comunidades son diversas, ¿no? Porque hay indígenas, pero también hay riberiños, hay quilombolas, hay pobladores, y no todos son, digamos, indios con plumas, que es lo que puede tener la visión a alguien de muy lejos que tiene una idea de que hay indígenas perdidos en el Amazonas, sino que hay poblaciones que llevan ahí, que forman parte de la selva y que pueden explicar sus historias. Esto también fue una colaboración también con El País, que ha venido publicando estas historias y con mucho interés. Ahora estamos haciendo la segunda temporada, esta segunda temporada también con financiación de Pulitzer, y hemos empezado a hacer tres de las historias. Nuestro objetivo es acompañar a los defensores en su lucha y hacer que se comprendan los peligros que ellos enfrentan. Y esto se hace a través de que hablen ellos, y nosotros como periodistas estamos en segundo plano. Nosotros como periodistas no somos los protagonistas de la historia. Nosotros simplemente estamos ahí en alianza con los actores para que la historia salga fuera, para que la historia comunique y para que la historia llegue lo más lejos posible. Y yo creo que esto es lo que les quería contar, ¿no? Luchar esta guerra en el Amazonas es urgente, ¿no? Estamos ahí y estamos viendo, y todos ustedes lo están viendo, la urgencia es ya, no nos podemos estar pensando, bueno, a ver qué hacemos, cómo nos planificamos, cómo hacemos de aquí 6 meses, empezamos. Es una cosa de que tenemos que estar día a día, ¿no? Asumiendo los riesgos, evaluando los riesgos, pero sin miedo, ¿no? Porque ahí estamos jugándonos todos, ¿no? El futuro, no solo del planeta, que parece una gran cosa, pero el futuro de la especie, el futuro de nuestros hijos y nuestro propio futuro. Entonces, superar los egos en las alianzas y trabajar conjuntamente con el máximo, en alianza y de manera simétrica con el máximo de actores posible es lo que puede ayudar a que esta causa común de intentar luchar contra el cambio climático, la crisis climática, la emergencia climática, la catástrofe climática, sea de una manera eficaz. Y con esto ya simplemente quería mostrarles lo que es un clip muy corto sobre lo que ya estuvimos haciendo ahora con Pablo durante 5 semanas en la selva amazónica, que serán los 3 primeros capítulos de la segunda temporada de Rainforest Defenders, o Defensores de la Selva. ¿Otro? Gracias.
Thank you so much, Francesc. So we have 2 microphones here, and particularly since we have an online audience, we would like everyone to come to the microphones if you have questions for our panelists. You heard a lot of themes being talked about among the panelists and about collaborations, including trust and trying to further each other's skills. So please make your way, anyone who has questions, please feel welcome to come to the microphones and ask away.
Hello there, my name is Josie Malavi. I'm a 2020 reporting fellow and freelance filmmaker. Beautiful images, and really enjoyed the data that you shared as well. That was really compelling. My question is, where do you start in building the team for collaboration? Or how do you start to build that team of collaborators for these stories?
Hi, thank you for the question. Okay, in terms of building the team, I think it depends on the story that you're working on. So for instance, because definitely the nature of the story, like for example, where is the location of the story, for instance, would be very crucial. So those are some of the more practical considerations, for instance. From our experience, for example, working with ICIJ, typically it starts with a leak, and then you kind of look at what the information is telling you, and then we reach out to journalists who are working in these countries, for instance. So I think geography is one consideration. And then another one would be expertise, of course. So for example, in the Philippines, last year we worked on a collaboration with Tempo, South China Morning Post, and Korea Times on investigating digital sex crimes. When the pandemic started, reports on online sex crimes also shot up because the demand for material rose, while the supply also rose because a lot of people lost their jobs. So you have families peddling their children. When we were starting to build the team for that collaboration, we thought of working with a reporter who's been covering the police beat. So he had a lot of knowledge already on working on crimes, for instance. And perhaps another consideration also is the reach of the newsroom, because obviously, I mean, that's all of our goal is when our stories are out, we want for our stories to reach the audience that we need to reach to. So for instance, in another investigation, we also worked with a broadcast network in the Philippines called ABS-CBN, because the story requires more visual elements into it. So definitely TV would be the way to go for us. So again, I would say geography, expertise of the reporter, as well as the reach of the newsroom as well. Thank you.
Hola, buenos días a todos y todas. Quisiera como hablar de colaboración en términos y preguntarle más a Francesc, porque hablaron de colaboración entre periodistas, pero y la colaboración con los Rainforest Defenders y con las comunidades. Quisiera entender bien esa colaboración con quienes cuentan esas voces que ustedes cubren como los Rainforest Defenders.
Sí, la respuesta es que nosotros, bueno, claro, llegamos, somos un equipo muy ligero, en este caso Pablo y yo, pero la idea es que no tenemos una idea preconcebida de la historia que vamos a contar, sino que cuando llegamos escuchamos a la comunidad, escuchamos sus historias, y entonces ahí se empieza primero una construcción de confianza, primero, no es, sino un poco para combatir esta idea extractiva de que llega el periodista a contar su historia y llega a ilustrar lo que él ha pensado y empieza a tomar notas y hacer preguntas, sino más bien hacer, digamos, claro, no tenemos una idea previa, hay digamos, una investigación previa de cuál es el tema, cuál es el problema, pero luego cuando estamos ahí es mucho más la colaboración con las propias comunidades. Es la comunidad la que nos explica la historia. Y es a través de la construcción de confianza que se teje esta alianza con ellos, que son los que van a contar la historia. Nosotros, al final, vamos a vehicular la historia que cuentan de la mejor manera posible para que alcance un público y traducirla para que alcance un público lo más amplio posible. Pero yo creo que esto, que es un periodismo que requiere más tiempo, quizás es más caro, porque no se puede llegar a la comunidad y salir corriendo, sino que necesita un tiempo, y a veces esta construcción de confianza no es inmediata, o no se consigue en una historia, pero se consigue en otra. Entonces, a veces nos hemos encontrado que íbamos a buscar una historia y hemos acabado haciendo otra mucho más potente, porque es la que estaba allí y la que, a través de esta construcción de alianza, confianza, nos brindaron para que explicásemos, porque ellas consideraban que esa era la historia fuerte. Entonces, yo creo que hay que tener tiempo, ¿no? Ser equipos ligeros, no equipos pesados, que son muy agresivos en la comunidad, que llegan 4 o 5 y se instalan y empiezan a desplegar equipos, sino un equipo muy ligero y, pues, esto, ¿no? Con mucha humildad y estar a escuchar, ¿no? Yo creo que la escucha es la clave para hacer una buena alianza y sacar una buena historia.
Hello, I have a question for Andy. Andy, we have seen so much progress in collaboration, including by global media, but we also have seen that some of the problems remain with sometimes global media not engaging with other collaborators in equitable ways, not understanding how to collaborate, not giving proper credit, not fully embracing this idea of leaving the egos behind. But you have been able at NBC to overcome a lot of barriers and to really produce this successful collaboration. So what do you recommend to other journalists working in global media? How do they negotiate within their structures and their legacy medias, help them understand the value of working with others in an equitable way?
Right. So let me see if I can try to unpack that. That's a great question, Marina. So first off, I know that within NBC, when we're considering a collaboration, we talk right away at the outset that everyone gets credit. The reporters who work on it get appropriate credit. To me, credit is should not be an issue at all. And I think any newsroom, any global newsroom who looks at collaborating with a smaller newsroom on the other side of the world as just fixers or something like that is making a grave mistake. So I think several of the panelists were bringing up issues of building trust and relationships. So I know that internally we try to make sure that everyone understands how this works, how a collaboration works, and I think with each collaboration we get better at it, but it's always a work in progress because there'll be different collaborators, we brought up issues today about language barriers, issues about skills being in different places, so we try to figure out how to complement each other. I think we try to keep everything open. So for instance, on publication dates, we try to be as absolutely flexible as possible. More often we're actually pegging our publication date to the partner on the other side of the world rather than our own wishes. Unless we have a strong wish for a particular reason, we'll try to hew to that. So publication dates, credit, those to me are the easy things. The harder things are sharing ideas and sharing skills. So I think some of the things that people were talking about, I know that Kuka, today you were talking about, how you wish that you had more workshops or things like that to build a knowledge base among all your collaborators. I know that one of the great things about talking, like Karol and I did, we would talk a lot. So Karol may have done some amazing work in the field or spoken with officials in Palawan in the Philippines, and I may have totally nerded out and spoken with experts on the nickel industry on Wall Street or elsewhere. And then we bring each other into the different interviews and try as much as possible to both be on those conversations at the same time. Sometimes time doesn't allow that, particularly time zones. But those are just some of the things. I don't know if that answers all your questions, but I definitely think that collaborations are important. Big newsrooms and small rooms have to find a way to work together because as Francesc was saying, these stories are terribly important and we need to do them urgently. And I think together we can make these stories far more powerful than any one of us can do individually.
Hello. Hi, I'm a reporter for Quartz, a business news organization where I cover cross-border issues, including the climate economy and global labor migration. And I wanted to hear, and you started on it, so I'm hoping to hear a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of how you share information across big investigations like this. I'm working on one right now, and I'm probably doubling the amount of time I'm spending just kind of maintaining the information databases and things like that. So if you have any advice on dealing with this sort of volume of information between collaborations, that would be great.
Okay. Hi, Aurora. That's a good question, actually, because since we're talking about radical sharing of information. In the case of me and Andy, when we worked on the Tesla story, of course, privacy and security is our primary concern. However, it also depends on what works for each of us. So for the most part, of course, in terms of communication, sharing quick information, we use Signal. But throughout the process, we've been sharing through Google Drive because that's what works for us. But for the Rainforest Investigations Network, we have a secure platform which is used by all of the fellows. So that's where we also share the information. So it's a mix of Google as well as the platform, which is, we call it Confluence. So I guess, again, it depends on what works for the members of the group. But for other collaborations, like for example, because of the scale of the investigation, like for example, the work that we've done with ICIJ, there are separate platforms that we use to share information. So nothing goes through Gmail, for instance, for that kind of collaborations, and we even use PGP. So, thank you.
This will be the last question too, by the way.
All right, I'll make it worth it then. Inspired by a question made earlier by one of our colleagues, and especially seeing Francis' video, this session today is about collaboration and about the sharing of knowledge in tackling this rampant race against climate change. And I was wondering, not only to Francis, but for everyone in the panel, where does the traditional knowledge of local communities fit within that sharing of knowledge and that collaboration of knowledge? I know especially with indigenous communities in Brazil, that is a big piece of the puzzle, and that like fits very big on the feedback on like how to better understand how climate change is affecting the larger ecosystem. So I wanted to know how and where does traditional knowledge fit within your collaboration networks?
Well, it is important to, of course, understand the traditional knowledge and how the people are suffering the effects of climate change in their everyday lives. Some of them are not suffering climate change, but land grabbing, aggression, mining, people getting in, extracting, and then they see the devastation of that much more or faster than climate change will affect. But yes, every community you talk, they say there's less fish, it's more hot. The river has changed its cycle of tides, and all this, it makes for them, it's the local knowledge or the traditional knowledge can understand these are cycles. What they are worried about is the acceleration of the change of the path. So if they have got problem with that. So in the collaboration thing is to understand how they read and how they feel and how they live the climate change on their daily lives, and how their knowledge is adapted or not that much to understand that this is a big issue. But in general, what we find is a very extended consciousness that what is happening is something very, very dangerous for them and for the world. So they have this, even in their own conception of the spiritual world or their traditions, they know that something is changing, and they are ready to act and ready to share with people coming from the outside. their feelings and maybe have a better understanding of what they are suffering. So we sometimes have very interesting conversations with the communities and how they feel, and then they try to understand something that is changing their daily lives in very, very rapidly.
Well, in our project, I think most of the communities we covered are, well, not really like indigenous, but there are, the one that I went to was they're encroachers. They have been cutting down the forest in East Java for years, but at some point they realize it's not really sustainable for them because it's destroying the forest. So for the traditional knowledge, and I think my example is not really perfect for this, but like the reporting that done by city from Pekalongan in Central Java, they try to incorporate the traditional communities of coffee in preserving the forest, so they won't cut down the woods, the trees for the woods anymore. And also, I think the one done by Mai, she went to a community living in the mangrove forest in Vietnam. There are some traditional tales and knowledge that's been told to later generations that becomes the basis of their efforts to preserve the mangrove forest. So, yeah, I think those are the two best examples from the project in incorporating the traditional knowledge.
I think, of course, traditional knowledge, at least for the stories that we've done at RIN, is at the center actually of the story, even if however global it is, especially because how global the story is. For instance, when we were doing research on palm oil plantations in Palawan, one of the key problems there was that the government turned the land into plantations because they thought they were idle lands. But actually, the lands are idle because the indigenous community there are following the kaingin system or the follows system, where you give the land some time before growing crops again. So I think, again, that's at the center of the story. And then another example is, this is more of a solutions-based story, is the knowledge of indigenous communities on how to harvest resin from almasiga trees, again, from Palawan. It's also at the center of a good example of how enterprise development can be done by indigenous communities. So instead of being just part of the trade where they supply resin to big businesses, now they are part of the trade, and in fact it has become profitable. And if you look at the financial statements, they are able to earn money from harvesting resin. So in this case, it's a good example of forest management where they are able to earn a livelihood but also protect the forest. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your time this morning, and we'll try to clear out for the next panel, but I cannot thank the co-panelists here enough. This is brilliant, sharing all of your experience doing collaborations around the world on such an important subject. Thank you so much.
Thank you.